Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Kate. I'm joined by my friend Andrew, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about our top three favorite movies of 2023. So, Andrew, with your number three favorite film of all time from this year, what would you say was your number three?
Well, this is actually one that literally snuck in at the 11th hour because up until Sunday morning at 12 o'clock, the number three spot for me belonged to Godzilla minus one. But this one managed to sneak in at the 11th hour and get in there. We have The Iron Claw, the biopic of the Von Erich wrestling family from Dallas, Texas. And this is a very sad movie, but it's a very well made movie. And anybody who knows anything about the Von Erich family knows that it's a story of grief, tragedy, and self destruction. And this movie does not pull any punches in showing any of that. And the worst part is they actually even left out some big chunks of it too. Like they only focus on four of the brothers. There was actually another one who died by his own hand in a similar way to some of his older siblings. And again, it's just a very bleak and raw depiction of it, but it's a very well written script and it's very well acted. Actually, probably, and I was genuinely surprised how good Zach Efron was in this movie. I don't consider him like a truly amazing actor. I think he's competent, but I don't think he's amazing. But he was very, very good in this. He plays Kevin Von Erich, who was the officially second oldest, but was the oldest in this context because the oldest Von Erich son actually only passed away at the age of 6. But yeah, no, he gives a very emotional gut punch of a performance of a man who is dealing with just tragedy after tragedy and just more grief upon more grief, and he's barely keeping it together. It's affecting every part of his life, from his personal life to his professional life as a pro wrestler. And it's an emotional gut punch of a performance. I also give credit to the gentleman who plays his father, Fritz Von Erich. Does a very good job at portraying the what's since come out in hindsight as the very manipulative, almost petty nature of Fritz. But yeah, no, it's a story I'm glad they told and they treated it with dignity, but it's a very sad story to get through. Like parents aren't supposed to outlive their children, let alone outliving five or six of your kids and three of them dying by their own hand. It doesn't pull any punches, and I'm glad it didn't. And it also does a very good job at presenting what the pro wrestling industry was like at that point in the late 70s and into the early 80s, what's often referred to as the territory days. It was you had the ultra beloved blue collar heroes, the over the top villains who got booed by the crowd. But there was also, there was a dark side to it. There was a lot of steroid use. There was a lot of drug use. A lot of guys going through injuries that they really shouldn't have worked through. And again, it does a very good job at portraying all of that.
No, yeah, I totally get what you mean. And yeah, regarding Zach Efron in particular with what he did, I will admit he's never been one of my favorite actors, but I think he's always been a decent actor. But yeah, I've come to appreciate his acting skills a lot more ever since I saw his performance as Ted Bundy in Extremely Wicked. And since then, I've kind of always been looking forward to see him step into more dramatic roles like that. And yeah, would you say that this is the best performance he's ever given?
I would say so, yeah. Because again, he's a man who really shouldn't be able to keep it all together and somehow manages to barely do. And that's not something that's not an easy performance to give. And he does a very good job at it. Plus, I give dedication because he did really bulk up for the role, too.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get what you mean. All right, why don't we move on to my number three favorite film of the year, and that is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So, with Guardians 3, I honestly think that of all the Guardians movies, all three of them, this one, in my opinion, is probably the strongest. And the reason why I say that is because of the narrative. The narrative of this movie was very strong, and to me, it had so much emotion and depth to it. And I'm not saying that the first two didn't, of course they did, but this had so much emotion to it, and it was a lot more than, it was more than what I've experienced from most recent superhero content in the past few years. So that was something that really kept me invested in the movie. It kept me invested in the plot. It kept me invested in the characters, which is something I'm always trying to get invested in when I watch a movie. Another thing that I really liked was I love how Rocket was essentially the protagonist of this movie rather than Star-Lord. Star-Lord was pretty much the lead of the first two movies, where in this one, while Star-Lord is still a very huge character, this movie really fleshes out Rocket by showing us his past. And that's really nice because it gave him the most development. I think he had the most development in this film, which was really great to see. And another thing that the movie achieves very, very well while being very exhilarating and taking time to flesh out each character. When it comes to the characters, the movie manages to juggle so many different characters and give them each satisfying arcs that really do pay off in the end. So, yeah, as a movie, this is probably one of the best superhero films I've seen in recent years and might actually be one of my new favorite superhero films of all time. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why it makes top three because it just had that much emotion and depth and compellingness to it.
Yeah, and basically it took the Guardians formula and it gave us more of it. And it worked as a great send off for not only James Gunn from the MCU, but it kind of does feel like a send off for the Guardians as a whole. Because the way it ends, I don't want to say they broke up, but they're kind of all going their separate ways for the time being. It wasn't like a negative breakup, like say the Avengers in Civil War, but everybody's kind of going off and taking care of some personal business, and it's kind of a bittersweet ending, but I think it was fitting for a group that we've seen come together and expand and grow emotionally. And plus the fact, I mean, it's a Guardians movie. So great soundtrack to be expected. We got that really fun, imaginative action. And also the fact that this movie had the best MCU villain we've had in a long time in the High Evolutionary. Like the fact that I am honestly of the opinion they probably should have picked him to be the next big bad as opposed to Kang, but we'll save that conversation for another time.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to just how great the movie is, I give a lot of credit to everybody involved, but I especially give credit to James Gunn because his movies to me, whether it's Guardians 1 or Guardians 2 or The Suicide Squad or even Super, actually, his movies always have a lot of heart to them, especially when it comes to the story. And I think that this is probably his best movie so far as a writer and director. And because of that, I really look forward to what he'll do with Superman Legacy.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to what he can do now that he's basically the head honcho of the DC film world moving forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right, why don't we move on to your second favorite film of the year? And this is also my number one favorite film of the year, and that is Oppenheimer.
What a fucking movie, pardon my French.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I first heard this was being made, I'm like, oh, that is going to be something to see. And then the trailers came out, and I'm like, oh, yeah, this is going to be something to see. And then I saw it in theaters. And for a 3 hour long movie about a historical figure that is not as well known today as I think he should be, I saw this at 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, and the theater was packed. And I mean packed. And I didn't even get a chance to see it opening weekend. I think it was week 2 or 3, and the theater was still packed. This was a phenomenal film. It really, really was. And my main reasons for that is let's start with Cillian Murphy and his portrayal of J. Robert Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer is one of the most complicated and controversial figures in all of human history because nobody will argue he was a absolutely brilliant scientist. But his greatest achievement, his greatest discovery did forever change the world, and they weren't putting that genie back in the bottle. And that's still and we're still feeling the effects of that discovery to this day. So, and the fact that that discovery haunted him for the rest of his human life, that's a very complicated figure to try and portray. And Cillian Murphy managed to do a perfect job at.
Cillian Murphy definitely did a fantastic job, and I'm not gonna lie, going into this movie, I didn't know like a whole much about the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer. So going into this, it was a great learning experience for me. I mean, I know that no biopic is 100% accurate, but it was great to see. And Cillian Murphy definitely brought a lot of life to the character. And I honestly hope that this is the movie that he wins an Oscar for.
I really can't think of any other performances that can come close to it this year. Again, he perfectly portrays everything Oppenheimer was. He's an ultra brilliant scientist, but he has an ego. He's such a control freak that he makes some very powerful enemies along the way. His personal life is a mess, but he mastered the atom more than any human in history besides maybe Niels Bohr. But when he realized what he had truly created, again, it haunted him the rest of his life, and that was very subtly portrayed by Murphy in this movie. And that is not something that's easy to pull off without making them seem like a complete villain or sugarcoating it so much that they're not even a proper portrayal of the actual person. But Murphy manages to perfectly straddle that line.
Yeah, Murphy was definitely a real standout in this movie. And another thing that is definitely a standout is the direction and writing of Christopher Nolan. I would argue that this is probably one of his best films of all time. I think it's up there with the Dark Knight trilogy and Memento and Inception. This movie is really an example of how extraordinary a filmmaker he is and a storyteller. And I honestly think that he really is one of my favorite directors of all time because his movies, no matter what it is, always have creativity, depth, emotion, ambition. That's what I'm always looking for when I watch a movie. He's able to deliver on all of that with pretty much all of his films, and especially this one. And I think it really proves just how great a filmmaker he is.
Yeah, this movie could not have been directed by anybody else besides Christopher Nolan. Because if you look at this script, there is a lot of different genre bending going on in this movie. There's elements of a spy movie. There's elements of political drama. It's a character study. It's a legal thriller. In with a less talented hand to guide this and shoot it and be the kind of creative force behind it, this movie would have been a mess. But Christopher Nolan was the perfect choice because he's got such a dedication to practical effects. He's got such an attention to detail, and he's very good at visual storytelling. If this man does not win Best Director for this film, I don't think he will ever actually do it. Because in my opinion, this is a peak. This is a masterpiece of a film.
It definitely is. And I honestly hope that the movie at least wins Best Picture this year.
I mean, I hope so too, but I have several issues with how the Academy makes selections. But again, we'll save that conversation for another time.
All right. Well, why don't we move on from Oppenheimer? Why don't we move on to your favorite film of the year and my second favorite? And that movie is none other than Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Oh man, what is there to say that hasn't already been said about this movie already? I mean, it is such a beautiful film. Why don't you talk about it first? What were your thoughts on the movie?
This is the best animated film ever made. Straight up, this is the best animated movie ever made. Basically, this film took the already phenomenal base that was Into the Spider-Verse and simply did more of everything that made Into the Spider-Verse great. Again, we've got more mind-bendingly gorgeous animation. It's almost a little too much on occasion. Like, I do not know how somebody with epilepsy would watch any of these movies because, oh boy, it's a little much on occasion. But it's gorgeous and it's beautifully animated and it's so smooth and it's got such great colors and textures. It really does feel like somebody just animated a comic book. And on top of that, it gives us a main villain in the spot who somehow manages to seamlessly transition from being a complete comedy relief character at the beginning of the movie to by the end actually being rather intimidating and kind of scary. Like especially at the very end of the movie where he's, coming through the portal and kind of looking like almost like a freaking HP Lovecraft monster. So great main villain. Jason Schwartzman did a great job voicing him. And again, I just can't get over how seamlessly he transitions from complete joke of a villain to, oh, this guy is actually really terrifying and could literally alter the fabric of not only our universe, but every universe. But yeah, so great main villain. And then it also has a great secondary antagonist in Miguel O'Hara. And I really like how complex they made Miguel in this movie. Because, yes, he is a hero, but he's been so twisted by the events of his past. And his motivations and methods are kind of muddy in the waters that he's like, can you still call him a hero? Because, yes, he is defending the right thing, but he's going about it completely the wrong way. Also, let's talk about the fact that this movie is basically stuffed to bursting with Spider-Man lore. Like there is some deep cuts from the comics, there's some stuff from the live action movies, from both the Sony movies and the MCU for crying out loud. There's stuff from the animated series for crying out loud. There's stuff from the Sony games. I can't get over just how much Spider-Man they stuffed into this movie without making it feel ridiculous.
It really is a love letter for Spider-Man fans worldwide.
It really is. And on top of that, you got great action. First thing that comes to mind is the scene in Bombay, New York, and how great that action scene is with the tower kind of falling off and falling in. And then let's give credit to the fact that this movie not only had a hell of a twist at the end with Miles discovering that, oh, I'm not in the right Earth, am I? And also a great cliffhanger discovering that in this universe Spider-Man had died, and in this universe Miles became the Prowler. I'm not doing justice how much I loved this movie.
Yeah, I love the movie too. And I'm not going to lie, going into it, I was a little worried. And the reason why is because I heard how great the reviews were and I heard what everyone else was saying about it, but part of me was just kind of worrying, man, are they really going to be able to like recapture the magic that Into the Spider-Verse had in that film? But yeah, going into this, my expectations were definitely surpassed. I was blown away by how great this movie was. I don't think I've ever seen an animated movie this gorgeous and beautifully made. The artwork, the animation in this film is top notch, and I praise the team behind it for what they accomplished. They just did such an incredible job. Also, aside from how beautiful the movie is, the movie also has a really unique and compelling story to tell, which is something, again, I'm always looking for when I watch a movie. And not only that, but like I mentioned before with our other movies, it also had so much emotion to it, which was so nice. It made the story stronger and it gave it depth, and it brought so many characters in, and they each had, I would say, an arc, and they each had depth to their characters as well. And actually, one standout appearance that I really liked that really made me smile was the appearance of the Spectacular Spider-Man from the 2000s. I grew up loving that show and I was so disappointed that it only had 2 seasons. So seeing him appear was so, it just made me smile, you know?
Yeah, it really did. And this voice cast they had did a phenomenal job. Everybody gives a really emotional performance. It's got heart, it's got humor, it breaks your heart. Like, again, I'm not emphasizing enough how much I love this movie. And another thing that I actually just thought of that I need to mention is they introduced new characters into this movie that everybody instantly fell in love with. Like for me, Hobie Brown and Pavitir. I'm not going to pronounce this right, so I apologize in advance. Prabhakar, the Indian Spider-Man. First time getting introduced in this movie, everybody instantly fell in love with him. And we get to see more of them in Beyond the Spider-Verse, and we get to see two other fan favorites come back with Spider-Ham and Spider-Man Noir. This is just a phenomenal movie, and I'm of the opinion that people who clap at the end of movies makes you look like a bit of a twit, because unless you're like, it's a very rare possibility, but nobody who actually made the movie is going to be there. But Across the Spider-Verse and Oppenheimer are two movies that actually did deserve people to stand up and clap after it without looking like a twit, because they are really both, they're both masterpieces. I just like Spider-Verse a little bit more just because I did have one tiny issue with Oppenheimer, which is like the last 45 minutes does drag a little bit, but that's a very small complaint.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. All right, guys. Well, that has been our top 3 favorite movies of the year. Thank you so much for listening. Oh, yeah, and we just want to give a quick shout out to all the recent subscribers that we've had on our channel. We appreciate it, and thank you so much for listening. All right, guys, we will see you later. Thanks. Bye.